The Authors Forum exists to inspire success. We will talk with authors and others in the publishing industry to bring you essentials and advice. Dr. Veronica Esequi is your host for Authors Forum.
Welcome to the Authors Forum. I'm your host, Dr. Veronica Esequi, and my guest today is Brenda Duffey, author of The Peacemaker. Brenda, welcome to the Authors Forum.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about your background and where were you born and raised?
I'm a Kentucky girl. I was born and bred in Kentucky and went to school there. I was educated in the public schools there and went to the University of Louisville, undergraduate, and then got my master's in social work at the University of Louisville. Married, had 2 children, and became a homemaker for a period of time, and then we left Kentucky, moved to New Mexico, and I spent 10 years in New Mexico and got back into teaching again.
So what brought you to Oregon?
When I married the second time, my second husband wanted to be on the ocean. We kind of came up on the great adventure in 1996 and settled first in Salem and then found our little dream spot in Florence.
Which is a beautiful city.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. They have the once a year book festival.
Yes, I've done it 3 years in a row.
Wow, yes. And so you said you were a teacher.
I was a high school English and social studies teacher, American history.
Which kind of will bring us back here to The Peacemaker, the book
Yes.
you've written a little bit. I understand you were also a teacher at a correctional, I read that and I was interested, a correctional facility for educated males in Oregon.
Yes.
What was your experience like with that?
When I moved to Oregon, I wanted to get back into teaching, but the profession was fairly full, and I was from out of state, and I was older. And because I had a master's in social work, I kind of fell into teaching in a correctional facility. I ended up in Florence teaching there. That's the facility where I retired. It was very fulfilling. I learned a lot. I learned how to relate to these young men who were in transition in their lives and who had had kind of a difficult experience. And I helped them get their GED, or in some cases get their high school diplomas, or just credit recovery, and try to help them get back on the path with their education after they left being locked up.
Wow. Do you miss that? That must have been very fulfilling.
It was, but the time for me to retire came, and I had bigger dreams, and one of them was my book.
When did you first discover your passion for writing?
I've always had a passion for writing. In fact, when I was young, I used to dabble with writing stories, like Nancy Drew type stories and those kinds of things. And I minored in English, did a lot of writing, did a lot of essay writing, wrote a lot of poetry, wrote short stories. So I always enjoyed writing, and it was just part of my expression. And of course, I learned a lot about writing when I was in the field teaching English and English literature.
Do you remember the very first thing you ever wrote?
I don't remember as an adolescent the first thing I wrote, but I do remember writing in college. I remember writing a dramatic poem, and I remember writing a sonnet, and some of the different types of poetry. But probably the first thing that I really wrote that kind of brought me on a path to think of writing as a career was a little short story I wrote in college called A Squeaky Wheel Gets Oiled.
Which is
now my play.
Yes, it's a musical,
that I've
correct?
adapted into a musical.
Tell us just a little bit about it so that everybody, you were a playwright, a musical playwright.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's a story. It's based on the phrase, it's the squeaky wheel that gets the oil, and it's a little fable that takes place in a kingdom of wheels. And basically there are the power people in the town. There's Big Wheel, there's Ferris Wheel, and there's the wheelbarrows who operate the construction business. And then there are the minor characters that don't have the power, and the main one is Spare Wheel and his wife Fifth Wheel. And they're all happy and they live in this little village, but there's all kinds of abundant oil, but then there's an oil drought. And the big wheels kind of are keeping all of the oil for themselves, and the less important people aren't getting them. And Spare Wheel's got a really bad squeak, and he really needs oil. So he devises a plan along the way, and at the end of the story, it has a happy ending. He gets his oil.
That's very ingenious. I love it. I can just see all these wheels, different kinds of wheels.
Yes.
Just like our society, there's all kinds of wheels, right?
Yes.
So coming back to the Peacemaker, why did you write the Peacemaker?
Well, when I was a homemaker for many years, as I said, when my children were born, and then I got back into teaching when we moved to New Mexico, and it was kind of an interesting world for me because I had always loved history and I had spent years teaching history before I became a homemaker. And then when I got to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I started teaching history, things had changed a lot in the world of history. We had the women's movement, we had the civil rights movement, we had the American Indian movement, and people were beginning to be aware that the history that was being taught in the schools was not necessarily everybody's history, and that a lot of people were left out of the history. And as I taught there in this little program, I actually helped develop programs where we taught history from the standpoint of a cultural, integrated type of history, where we wove in the stories of everybody and what part they played in the development of the country. And as I was teaching there over a period of years, I began to think, you know, if I didn't know these things, and I had a degree in history, what about the massive number of people out there who've long graduated from school and they don't really know these stories? And so an idea began to germinate that I would write a book that would tell these stories. And that was where the idea started, when I was in this little middle school, and it was going to be after I retired. And then when we moved to Oregon, and I did a stint of teaching Native American history at Chemawa Indian School, I learned about the story of the Peacemaker and that culture and that society, and that became my springboard for beginning my story of American history.
It's beautiful. I truly enjoyed reading them. I have a few more questions to ask you on this. So one of the questions would be, who can benefit from reading The Peacemaker?
I think everyone can, especially females. You know, we make up 50 or a little bit of over 50% of the population. In our history, we have been anonymous in history. And we don't even come into history, or we're not even mentioned in history until the days of the suffragettes, right when we get the right to vote. And anybody who would like to understand what their society was like and what society was like for them, and some of the things that are part of this history and the fabric of this history, and the thing that connect us to our past, so that we can learn who we are and we can function better in society. And when people don't have when their culture has been stripped away from them, especially the Native Americans. The Native Americans are a very good example. They had their total culture stripped from them, not just their history, but everything, their way of life, the things that connected them to society. And they are struggling to get back to that. The African Americans are another example. But even females, to learn who we were as women and what we had to offer, and perhaps some of the ways our society has suffered because women were not empowered and did not have the impact that we needed to have.
When I was reading your book, The Peacemaker, I noticed a lot of the characters were female and they were powerful.
Yes.
Very powerful, okay? So I'm glad you brought that up. And you also published a novella called The Season.
Yes.
And what can you tell us about, I don't want to forget about that, then I'll come back to The Peacemaker.
Okay.
So what can you tell us about this novella, The Season?
The Season is a story that came to me that was part of my passion to develop a story for young people between the ages of 15 and up, even in their 20s, and even adults can read the story. But I wanted something short, because one of the things that has saddened me about young people in our society with the growth of technology is they don't read like they used to. And they don't read books. They read short things, but they don't read books the way that we used to read them. And we would sit down and we would read these books. And they don't even read them in high school and college like they used to. But I wanted to develop a story that would have a message that young people could relate to. And basically, it's the story is a metaphorical story of a village that goes through a tragedy with the massive shooting of a group of small children. And it's tied in with the Christmas season and the story of the Christmas season and how this town had moved away from that, and how after they come back to understanding some things through the gift of love that comes from a young boy in the story, that they come back together and they learn to grow, and they learn to forgive, and they learn to move on and bring love back into their lives.
Wow, The Season. Let's keep that in mind, everyone.
Yes.
When did it come out?
It came out about 3 months ago in 2013,
okay.
and it's available through Amazon.com.
And that's Brenda Duffey, D-U-F-F-E-Y.
Yes.
Correct? Okay. So, so the common message in your writing, would I say love?
Yes.
In your book, The Peacemaker, you have 2 pages with a dated chart between 1775 and 1975. That's 200 years.
Yes.
What I found that as I was reading your book, I don't know if that can be caught on camera, but when I was reading your book, every time I came across a new character, I would go back to see where were they.
Yes.
In the time period. So it almost made me feel like this was a non-fiction historical book. How much of it is fiction and how much of it is not fiction?
You know, someone asked James Michener, who was my mentor.
Okay.
I kind of based this book on a book that had quite an impact on me in the 1970s called The Covenant, that was written by James Michener. And it was a generational saga, and it was the story of South Africa and the history with apartheid. And so someone once asked James Michener, with all of the research you do to write your books, why do you write fiction? And his answer was, so I could tell the truth.
Oh.
And so this is fiction, but there's a lot of research of historical events that actually happened. The characters that are set here they're fictional, but the backdrop is very much nonfiction. And some of the characters are based on my own ancestors.
You know, I think a lot of people do what you, I mean, I write nonfiction and my books are, some of them are diaries, and I had to change their names, right? Because these people are still alive. And so I could say it's fiction, but it's actually nonfiction. Well, yeah.
Yes.
There's a lot of truth in that. Because sometimes there are very good writers, but they don't draw you in. You drew me right in. And so I would like to ask you a big favor, if you could read the first 2 chapters so everyone can have an idea of the style, how you are being taken in as you read the book.
Okay.
Okay.
This is the prologue, and it basically sets the stage by telling the story of the Peacemaker. The Onondaga chief Iowenta sat by the lake, nestled in the beautiful valley near the Seneca River. Tears of grief over so many clan brothers and sisters' deaths, including his own wife and children, blurred his vision of a land filled with trees and lush foliage. This rich, fertile valley had once yielded great crops of corn, acorns, beans, the three sisters, and fields full of wild berries, acorns, nuts, deer, bear, and rabbits. The chief heard their moans in the wind blowing through the trees used in the building of longhouses and canoes. Nature was crying with him over the unending seasons of war, torture, and bloodshed. The evil twin had a stronghold on the Onondaga. They were destroying themselves as well as the earth that sustained them with their endless thirst for more land, more food, more power. The grieving leader had brought home his share of prisoners to torture in ceremonies where men and women were forced to walk on hot coals, had their fingernails torn out, and ears pierced with burning sticks before they died, and were eaten in a sacrifice to the good twin who now had abandoned the people and the earth sustaining them. Iowenta looked out over the cornfields destroyed during the last attack. He filled his pipe with tobacco to smoke in a ceremonial offering to the good twin. Suddenly the bright light disappeared from the sky, warning the young warrior of the bleak future ahead in a world consumed by the evil twin's darkness. Through the pipe's smoke he saw a figure approaching from a great pine in the northeast corner of the field, holding a belt of white shells shining in the darkness like a silver moon. The Peacemaker spoke to Iowenta, telling him of his vision of an eagle emerging from a great pine. We must carry the great eagle's message to all the tribes of the Iroquois, the Seneca, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Mohawk. It is our destiny to join in a great confederacy based on peace. We will exchange courtesies and wampum around our 5 council fires instead of killing and taking hostages. We will become strong through unification, and our prosperity will be great.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. As if I didn't know, but what sets this book apart from other books?
It, as you pointed out, there's a fine line between fiction and nonfiction. This is more than just a book to be read for entertainment, for distraction. My hope is that people will digest it and read it and take with them a little bit of knowledge about our country and how it was built and the different things that have happened in our country as a result of moving away from the ideals of the Peacemaker after the American Revolution and disempowering women and disempowering other people. And the movement, as I see from the very beginning, the Iroquois people were suffering from many, many things that were the result